Welcome to the Unpacking the Framework video series. This series provides valuable information about the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. My name is Denise Luscombe, and this video introduction is being recorded on Whadjuk Noongar Budja. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the land you're listening from, and recognise their continued connection to country, waterways and community. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. This video is one of a series that describes the evidence and practice information that underpins the principles of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. You will hear from both national and international speakers throughout this video series. This video covers outcomes focused, a key principle of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention, and is presented by our national speaker, Professor Helen Bourke-Taylor. Helen is a teaching research academic and a fellow of the Occupational Therapy Australia Research Academy. Helen has been an OT for 35 years and has worked with children and young people with disability in Australia and the USA. Helen is the author of over 110 scientific papers, mainly about childhood disability, mothers of children with disability, and the psychometric development and evaluation of 4 psychometrically sound measures: the Assistance to Participate Scale, the Child's Challenging Behaviour Scale, the Health Promoting Activity Scale, and the My Family's Accessibility and Community Engagement Scale. Helen is author and developer of the peer and co-delivered Healthy Mothers, Healthy Families programs. Developed over her PhD and running continuously since 2012, Healthy Mothers, Healthy Families is the longest-standing, most effective program to improve maternal health-promoting behaviours, mental health and well-being of mothers of children and young people with disability. The Health Promoting Activity Scale is the specifically designed outcome measure for Healthy Mothers, Healthy Families program, and Helen is passionate about accurate and useful measurement in allied health.
Hi there, and thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure to present a short video for you about the outcomes-focused intervention for children with developmental concerns, delay, and disability. How do we apply the outcomes-focused principle? This presentation will give you an overview. I'm Helen Bourke-Taylor, and this is for the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention in Australia. Why are outcomes important to families? Well, early childhood intervention is costly and intensive for families. Costs include allocating family time and resources for the child to participate in early childhood intervention. There are costs that relate to families, such as maybe going out to dinner in favour of petrol to get to ECI services. We never really understand people's perspectives and what families go through, so we must be as cost efficient and time efficient as possible. Early childhood intervention is intensive for families because parents commit to developing the skills and investing in their child and learning new ways to support their child's development or participation and the family's overall health and participation. Early childhood intervention is intensive because parents also have to learn new skills. They've got to learn how to collaborate with new practitioners, educators, and services, and they may have no previous experience or knowledge of the whole service system. So they're going to commit a lot of time to learn how to get the best for their child and their family. So ECI practitioners are obligated to provide value for families through being efficient and outcomes focused. And being outcome focused requires decisions about services and strategies that are based on the outcomes that the children and families want for themselves. And this is best practice. So why should practitioners be focused on outcomes? Well, I've just written a couple of reasons up on the slide, and there are probably many more. Well, one reason is accountability, because when we use an outcomes-focused approach, it makes it easier to measure whether the strategies that have been implemented and the services recommended were effective and in line with the family priorities. It allows us as practitioners to be more responsive, so we can stay focused on the child and family goals and be responsive to the family priorities as we implement whatever's been arranged for the family and with the family. It also allows better communication, shared decision-making. Team members and families share a common goal, including how the change will be measured and when it will be measured, and also why it will be measured. And these are decisions that are made very early on in the piece, but they continue throughout contact with families and engagement with families. Another reason is family engagement, because families will engage better with services and prioritise ECI when they lead the development of specifically tailored goals and they agree on the outcomes for their child and family. Another reason is because being outcomes focused is a way to build capability in families, help them meet their child and family's particular needs. So how is the family going to enact change to meet their own specific priorities in the context of their family culture, their current situation, history, and future plans? What did they dream about for their child? What do they want for their child now? And what are they planning for their child in the future? And it's the same for their whole family, because the child, of course, is embedded within a group of people, and they're the most important people in the child's life. Also, we need to measure effectiveness, and being focused on outcomes allows the effectiveness of the strategies and services that have been offered to the family and provided with the family. It allows the effectiveness to be measured so that we can validate or change what's been offered and what is being engaged with in accordance with how the family is experiencing it. So the subjective outcomes and also the objective, which is what have we done to make sure we've got objective evidence to show the family that this has been helpful or maybe not. So being outcomes focused prevents early childhood intervention shortcomings. Well, what are the shortcomings in early intervention? These are the things we want to avoid, of course. So if we have a lack of service accountability because we're not being outcomes focused, families don't really understand what services and strategies are trying to achieve. So they're not going to engage as well. We can have services being unresponsive to the family's real needs and their priorities, and therefore the families will disconnect. We must tailor to families. So if families feel a lack of tailoring to their specific needs, then they may also disconnect and disengage. There's also more chance of miscommunication when we're not being outcomes focused. So when families and team members don't agree or collaborate well, the power isn't shared respectfully with parents, and the power isn't given to parents and honoured. So outcomes focused really begins with a conversation with the parent around what is important to the family. Disengagement is a real risk for early childhood intervention when outcomes focus has not been implemented, because it won't be relevant. And also the competence and confidence of parents isn't prioritised, along with family culture not being honoured when we don't work with families to identify their priorities and focus on outcomes. So it all leads to ineffective early childhood intervention. So let's go straight to some examples before we discuss some of the principles in more depth. So this graphic here shows you a child and some rings around the child, and those rings are in areas of the child's life that the family may identify as being very important. So some of those rings, for example, if we have the child in the centre and the child's participation in life, in daily activities, being there and being involved is the primary reason for early childhood intervention, we might reach for an outcome measure to measure that child's participation. And on the slide in front of you, I've put the young child's participation engagement measure. So the blue ring matches to the blue outcome measure. And that's just an example. There are many outcome measures for child participation. When we're looking at the child's next step, maybe, they've got an emerging skill that the parent wants to consolidate, or we want to understand, what sequence of skill development the child might want to follow, say for toileting or some mobility issue, we might reach for the Pediatric Evaluation Disability Inventory, which is also an outcome measure. So red matches red on the slide in front of you. For family participation, when families want to be engaged in things outside of the home, we might reach for the My Family's Accessibility and Community Engagement, or it's called the MyFace, to measure the family's perceptions of the community engagement and accessibility. When families are concerned with the parenting and family culture, we might reach for the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, purple matching purple. And then family routines, health and needs, we might reach for something like the routines-based interview. So what I'm showing you in this slide is the direct alignment between what the family identifies, the area of the child's life or child and family's life, and then finding an outcome measure that actually matches and aligns with that area of the child and family's life. So as an example of family routines, you might have a child who the family are very concerned around their eating, that the child's losing weight and meal times have become a really emotional issue. They don't have enough time for the meals, for the pace the child eats, and they feel rushed. So the family might be really concerned with establishing a routine to consolidate healthy habits. In this case, as a practitioner, you might reach for the routines-based interview. You may also meet a family where the parents are really concerned about the family's sleep and family leisure cycle, and they would really like to get out in the community more, but they feel more too home-based due to the family routines that are really interrupting their ability to get outside of the home. So you might set family goals using the COPM to assist the parents to change aspects of their leisure or self-care, such as sleep, to help the family functioning. When a family raises family participation, it might be related to cultural stigma. It could be related to all sorts of things. So the example here is, a family that wants to go to the local swimming pool and take their child swimming because a little child loves the pool and the water, but they feel too embarrassed and too reluctant to go out into the community, and they see too many barriers, so they don't go. So you might reach for My Family's Accessibility and Community Engagement to measure the family's perception and identify the barriers. What is it that's making the parents not want to go to the pool, and then what can be done about that? If a child's mobility and daily routines like shopping and toileting or other social activities is a problem, and skill acquisition is really primarily in the parent's mind, you might reach for the Pediatric Evaluation of Disability Inventory as the outcome measure. And finally, for an example here is if you had a parent, and in this example, I'm thinking of someone where they maybe have twins, and one twin is fully participating at home, playing, in preschool, and in the community when the family goes out. And the twin who maybe has a physical disability is not participating at the same extent. You might reach for a participation measure like the Young Child's Participation Engagement Measure to measure that child's participation in conjunction with the parent and their decision-making. So there are a few examples of the use of formal outcome measures that are standardized outcome measures that have been psychometrically tested to become outcome measures. So let's talk about what the outcomes principle is about. Up on the slide, I've written some of the details that are available in written form as well through PRECI. So outcomes are the benefits and changes that are experienced by children and families after agreed services, supports, and strategies are implemented. Number two, they follow professional family collaborations and practitioner family collaborations that have included children and families in the decision-making, goal setting, and the consequential design of services and support to achieve desired outcomes. So it's very much family-led. The outcomes-focused principle means that children and families are actively involved in monitoring their progress, and that services are will deliberately collect objective and subjective data. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Data can refer to anything where we measure meaningful behaviours, so the presence, the frequency, the duration of meaningful behaviours or skills, and indicators align with self-selected goals by the children and families. So data is gathered in a timely way, begins in the assessment because you've got to have a baseline, and continues at relevant points as identified by decisions between the professional and family. It may be 3 months later, it might be a week later. The time points where you've got to review progress will be determined by the team that includes parents and practitioners. So assessment can involve formal outcome measures, such as the outcome measures that I just described. And of course, there are many more in paediatrics. And believe me, we still need a lot more outcome measures that are tested and psychometrically sound to measure both stability and change over time. Data can be observation and other forms of collection that I'll also talk about in just a second. So a central element of the outcomes-focused principle is authentic assessment, which is designed to evaluate the functional outcomes on the children's learning, development, participation, and wellbeing. 4 very important areas. I'd like to elaborate on point 3 for just a second. What do we mean by outcomes-focused principle? Means that children and families are actively involved in monitoring progress and collecting data that's objective and subjective. So the subjective data will be the parent's report of, how well the child's going or how included they believe the child is, or another aspect where the parent is really reporting on how they feel, experience, or observe some factor. Objective assessment is more related to an external provable factor, such as, elbow range of motion, or how much of the toileting experience the child is now able to complete, or how far they can dress themselves in the morning independently. So objective means that we've got data that we can show is true, whereas subjective is constructing the person's experience. Many times these work together, and they should really work together well if in early childhood intervention. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on point 4 as well. Data refers to meaningful behaviours and skills or indicators that align with self-selected goals of children and families. So how do we begin? Well, we begin in an assessment process where the parent says, hey, these are our main concerns right now. And the practitioner will reply with, okay, well, here are some ways that we could keep track and measure so that we know where you are in 3 months or 3 weeks or whatever is necessary for that particular skill. So we need to have good conversations with parents where they can understand what our skills are and what we can help with, and also allow them to select their own goals so that we can work out how can we measure that behaviour or that skill or that indicator of change well, so the parent knows whether it's been successful or not. These are things to think about when you're selecting your outcome measures or the ways that you'll measure outcomes. Elaborating on point 5, which was data is gathered in a timely way, beginning in the assessment process and continuing through the relevant time points as identified by decisions between the practitioner and the family. So in the initial point, you have the opportunity to assess a skill or, concern. This may prop up again when you've had you have a very good relationship with the family, and the assessment point for that particular skill begins again. So an assessment tool must be validated for use as an outcome measure, and this is a very important point. We don't want to select discriminative tools such as those that tell us where the child is in relation to other children. That's not necessarily going to be a good outcome measure, because at time point 2, such as on this slide here, the child still may fall at the very bottom of skills for their age group. So it's not an outcome measure. Learning what constitutes an outcome measure is a very important skill for your training, and I encourage you to look into it if you're unsure. So selecting a validated outcome measure must include that it's valid for the population with which you're working, so the family that you're working with. And if it isn't valid for that population, you need to question yourself, why am I using it? And how can I use it in a useful way? The tool also has to be sensitive and responsive to change, and there has to be psychometric evaluations of this. So does the tool measure change over time usefully? Tools like the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure have been tested in many, many studies. And so we do know that it's responsive to change over time. And we also know that it's stable when nothing is expected to have happened. This is an important feature of outcome measures as well. An outcome measure also has to show that it has clinically significant change. So we don't want to just know if it's statistically significant, which is good for research. We want to know, does it really make a difference in the family's life? So we know with some tools such as the COPM that a 2-point change is clinically significant or really significant, authentically significant. So we can reach for a tool like that if we're looking for a good outcome measure. But of course, there are many. We also need to have a tool, an outcome measure tool, that has a low standard error of measurement. So that means that it has high stability. So if you administer it or your colleague administers it, there's going to be pretty good consistency between raters. But also if it's measured over time where we're not expecting any change, that we get the same score. So these are the sorts of psychometric factors that I'm talking about that you must check with your outcome measures to make sure you're selecting the right one for the family and with the family. To elaborate briefly on point 6, I wanted to talk about, well, what can we measure as outcomes? Because we're sure we can reach for outcome measures. We don't have measures in every aspect of what we may be needing to work with different children and families. So we can get a measure, we can observe, and there's other ways to collect data. So with the circles on the slide, I've just put a few ideas in there. So you could measure greater frequency or duration in a task, like a child that's able to sit for longer during reading time at the kindergarten and attends kinder more days because they'll get in and out of the car. You might have collection of a skill and data that emerges, so the child can do more of the dressing task or eat more of the meal independently. You also may choose an outcome measure for that, such as the PRECI. You also may measure that the child's doing less of something or the family is doing less of something, such as, time assisting the child to modulate their behaviour or, help themselves to settle down before they go to kinder. So less of sorts of behaviours that may interfere with their participation. You also may measure whether the status quo is maintained, because some children will have regression, and so maintaining their skill set where it is actually really a priority for the family. So maybe sometimes we're measuring that the status quo is being maintained. We may be measuring whether the child's more able to do a task. This may be through greater skill acquisition, and also whether they need less assistance. Do they need less help from the parents, or maybe only verbal prompts now? Do they need that specifically designed chair, or are they now able to sit without a backrest? So these are the sorts of factors we can measure to show change over time in our outcome, being outcomes focused. Participating more meaningfully, and this may come from the parent's subjective report or another subjective or parent proxy tool. And I did show a few examples such as the PEMCY and the MyFace in the examples just shown you. We may also show that time has reduced in task completion, or the amount of time that families spend at home. Maybe their priority is to get out in the community, or more efficient use of their time. So getting more things done in the morning. And there's many, many examples of this. So I won't go into too much detail, but I'm sure you can understand that. When we're talking about participation, we want to see more involvement. So the child is experiencing more of their learning in the preschool environment, or they're more involved in play at home, in the lounge room, actually playing with the toys, some more involvement. So there's lots of ways we can collect data to measure change and remain outcome focused. Finally, just to elaborate on point 7, the central element of an outcomes focused principle is authentic assessment. So it's got to really mean something to the child and family. We've got to evaluate what we call functional outcomes, and this may be related to the child's learning. Maybe they're able to sit and listen to a story from the front cover to the back cover, and they learn to sit and listen. Their development, so being able to do more around eating or toileting or another self-care task, or play more sophisticated with some particular toy. Participation, of course, is about being there and also being involved. So, is the child participating more, getting out of the house, going to the playground with the family? Is the family participating more in the community? And then also overall well-being, because we don't want to stress parents out with a fully comprehensive program that they really can't handle because they're still not getting good sleep. So family well-being has to be front and center for all outcomes-focused planning. So just a reminder that the outcomes-focused principle interconnects with several other principles in the early childhood intervention framework. So I'd like to direct you to the child-centered principle, the family-centered principle, teamwork principle, evidence-informed principles, and the 4 universal principles. Check them out. With thanks for being invited, and thanks for listening, and I hope that you have learned something or have some information to apply to your practice. I'd also like to thank PRECI for inviting me to give this presentation, and I wish you well, and thanks for all your work with Australia's young children and families. Take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this video, part of the video series Unpacking the Framework for the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. The review of best practice in early childhood intervention was commissioned by the Department of Social Services. Led by the University of Melbourne, the project team included PRECI, professionals and researchers in early childhood intervention, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, SNAKE, National Voice for Our Children, Children and Young People with Disability Australia, and ACD, Advocating for Children with Disability. Coordination and production of the video series was led by PRECI.